Alright gang, this one was a really fun one-day project. Got ourselves a nice little woodworking vise, the beautiful Peruvian walnut handle, a hard maple jaw. The inner jaw, I just decided to go up against the workbench there. But to get started, we just went around and routed our edge to flush cut it to the face of the 2x4s to facilitate, mostly just for this vise, but that'll be nice in the future too. But yeah, this thing is great. We can take a piece of wood, anything we're working on now, we can open this thing up, slide that in here, secure it here, work on the ends. We can lay it flat like this, get out our plane, do some block planing. It's a very good tool to have in your shop. We're going to get a lot of use out of this. It's going to be great for some of the projects we've got coming up. And yeah, here's how we did it. So before we can get started with our vise installation, we first need to use this flush trim router bit. I've got about a 1/4 inch overhang all the way around the table for the tabletop, so we're going to use the flush trim router bit and we're going to flush it up with the aprons. So here I'm getting the router set up, getting ready to start, and catastrophe happens. My bearing on the end of my flush trim router bit exploded. What can you do? It had been sitting there for about a year or so since the last time I used it, and probably was just dried out really bad. But yeah, it was pretty frustrating. As you can see from this clip here, I get a little frustrated, but you know, can't win them all. Here's the damage. It wasn't too bad. It because the bearing stayed on the shaft and didn't come completely off. It only diverted into the apron just a little bit. So we were actually able to clean this up later and kind of hide our mistake. There's the bearing. All shot to crap. So we put the kitty and we go to Lowe's. This is our cat MJ, aka Tripod. He was shot in the leg a couple years ago by one of the neighbors down the road. For what reason, I don't know. He's got 3 legs now. So here's our new bits. I got that extra long one as a just in case, but I'm sure I'll end up using it later. Did not end up using it for this project. All I needed was the 1 inch. Throw that one in the garbage so we don't accidentally use it again in the future. Alright, we're getting all set up and we can get back to it. Get this top trimmed up. So we've got our top all routed and flush trimmed now, but there's a couple of places where when I was cutting the ends of the boards for the frame of the table, which you can see that in a previous video, how to build the table. But when I was cutting those boards, my positive stop wasn't engaged on my bevel, on my miter saw. So it was actually at like 0.5 degrees, which caused a couple of minor alignment problems with putting the frame together and getting all of the aprons flushed with the edges of the legs and stuff. But this cleaned up pretty well with a sander. I say that's the key to being a good woodworker, right? Is hiding or learning how to hide your mistakes, because mistakes will happen. So here I'm taking a piece of hard maple and I'm going to cut a section off of this, and this is going to be the jaw for our vise. So first I'll square up the end, and then we're going to measure a piece that's going to be 14 inches long. And this piece of board is about 5 3/4 wide. The width doesn't matter too much as long as you have enough board to put the holes near the bottom of it for the vise plate and still be able to set the vise up to where the top of your jaw is flush with the top of your table. So here I'm going to set the mounting bracket for the vise. This is the part that goes underneath. I'm going to set it on my board, and I'm going to use a pencil to just kind of scribe around the edges so I can see where this will fit on the board. Excuse me. I'm going to take a measurement here just to see what the distance from the edge of that line to the edge of the board is. Compare that to the apron here. So I'm measuring from the top of the tabletop down, and it ended up for me being 3.5 inches. So I'm just going to take a pencil and slide that mark along the apron here. And here I'm just marking out, I've got some cross braces under the tabletop. So I'm just kind of marking out the position of that so I know kind of what I'm working with, where I can put this, because we're going to end up notching this out. And so here I decided to slide over towards the end of the table a little more because I have room to do so. And now I'm going to put some marks to show where to cut. And I'm going to take this line on over to the right hand mark. And then we'll just take our pole saw and get those cut up to our line. And I'm going to take my utility knife and I'm actually going to just trace that pencil line straight across so that I've got sort of a knife edge to chisel up to. Then we just start chiseling. I don't start right at the line. I kind of start near the edge of the board and just chip out a little at a time. If you were to start right at the line, what would probably happen is you would end up splitting a big piece that goes beyond your saw mark. So just try to be as parallel to the tabletop as you can here. It doesn't have to be perfect. And as you'll see in a moment, I end up taking my sander just to smooth this out instead of spending a bunch of time trying to flat chisel upside down after we get the bulk of the material out. But you just kind of generally want this to be flat. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So here we'll dry fit our vise body, which I needed to extend the width of this a little bit, so I ended up pulling out the pull saw here and just kind of cutting about another 1/16 off of the end here. So that opened it up, and now we've got enough clearance. Still a little bit tight, so I ended up taking the chisel, and I guess my cut wasn't perfectly straight, so I used the chisel to straighten it up. This is pretty easy when you've got really sharp chisels. And then here's me pulling that sander out just to smooth that out a bit. And here we're getting about 2 3/4 from our notch to the bottom of the tabletop. So we're gonna rip that down here on the table saw. I've got a piece here that's a little bit longer than it needs to be. So we'll rip it first, and then we'll chop it down on the miter. And you actually need about 4.5 inches of material to mount the plate to. So here I'm just measuring the length, and I'm going to chop this down. I think it ended up being, like I said, 12 and something. I'm sure I'll show it here in a second. Yeah, 11 3/4. So I just put 4 2-inch deck screws, kind of got them started on there. I slide this in and just secure it to the apron. And make sure we don't have anything poking through. So just checking the fitment of our plate there again. And this is when I realized that this is maybe still not square on that one end. So I chisel it a little more. And my big dumb head's in the way. There we go. Now we got a nice clean fit. We do still need another block behind the one we just put in, so gotta rip that one down. This will be the same thickness, and this time I'm gonna, again, I'll use 4 2-inch deck screws to secure this to the other block, being sure that the placement of those screws isn't gonna hit the screws that I put in to the other block. Now here I'm gonna use a clamp to hold it in place so I can get behind it and screw it from the backside. Alright, so I'm putting the plate on my jaw face again, and what I'm doing here is I'm going to take a paddle bit, or actually I think I ended up using a Forstner bit here, yeah. So I'm taking a Forstner bit, and this ended up being the wrong size actually. I thought this was going to be like a 11/16 and a 5/8, where the middle hole would be the bigger one, but it actually I ended up needing to drill this out to 1 inch on the middle one for the vise screw, and then for the runner arms, those ended up being 3/4. But I'm just carefully taking the Forstner bit, trying to make sure it's centered inside the hole, and then because it's so short, I take a drill bit out of my hole cutting kit and stick it down in there, set it in the end of the Forstner bit there, and hold it while I give it a little tap with the hammer just to make sure that the little tip, the brad point on the Forstner bit leaves a mark. And then we head over to the drill press and we're going to drill these out. Again, you don't need a drill press. You could just use a hand drill, but I have a drill press, so that makes it handy, and I can make sure I drill the hole straight this way. And you can see here I'm actually using the 5/8 Forstner bit to drill this hole, and that's the wrong size. I do end up having to re-drill that, but I did that off camera. So for securing the jaw to the vise plate, I'm using these 1-inch panhead screws. And right here, I'm not actually screwing it in yet. I'm actually running the drill in reverse, and I'm going to stick it into each of the holes and run it backwards just to kind of leave myself a little divot for the drill bit for my pilot drill to drill through, so I can line it up perfectly. So we'll just take this all back apart, take off the acorns, unscrew the vise screw, let it do a little spin-a-rooney, and then head back over to the drill press. Now, is this just something that happens in my shop, or do you guys believe in Murphy's Law? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. See how bad my countersink bit is just wobbling here, and I'm sitting there looking at it, not even realizing that something's about to go wrong here. Honestly, I can't even believe I made it to the third hole before this happened. Womp, womp, womp. Yeah, so apparently I didn't chuck that down tight enough. Thankfully, nothing crazy happened, but you know, be careful of that stuff, guys. Like that drill bit could have easily just come flying out of there and stuck into me. Now I got it secured in there real good, and we'll finish off those last two pilot holes. As you can see, I'm not going all the way down to leave a countersink hole because we don't need that here. I was just using the drill bit that was handiest for the right size for these panhead screws. So now I'm going to take the vise plate back off. Taking that cut off from our 2x4 that we cut for the blocking and shortened it up, and what this does is it allows me to stick it behind that taller section of the vise plate to where the vise screws, like the threaded hole, is towards the front like it's supposed to be for this vise. Now if you've got the VVOR version, that might be in the back and you won't have to do this, but this allowed me to clamp against that board and the board to push against the vise plate to get it lined up to where it needs to be and be able to hold it with a clamp. Now there's 6 screws in this plate, 4 of them kind of near the middle in a square shape, and then there's 2 more that are
kind of right where those runner bars are. Do not put screws in those because they will block your runner bars and you won't be able to put them in. So we're only going to use the 4 inner screws here. And I'm just using 2-inch deck screws again here to secure this into the 2x4 material. It's important at this step to make sure that the face of the vise bracket is flush with your apron face, because you want this to be square to the table. Otherwise your vise will end up with a wonky jaw. You'll have a gap towards one end. Okay, so off camera, and I turned this on my lathe. It's a piece of Peruvian walnut, and basically just started with some stock. I ripped it down to about 1 inch by 1 inch, and turned it down to 7/8, and I left a little bit of a section at the end here so that when I put it in and drop it in, it acts as a stop. For the other end, what we have is I drilled a hole. It was just the next size drill bit up from a 3/8 that I had, so that I can use a piece of this 3/8 oak dowel, and we're going to stick that through like this, and we're going to leave a little bit of a shoulder on either side. I'm going to glue that in place, and so that way when we stick it through here, and then we'll put our dowel in place and glue it, and we'll let that set, and then that'll act as a stop so that it doesn't come out, and then we'll have ourselves a handle. Now, I didn't record myself turning the walnut because you could just as easily go to one of the big box stores or a hardware store, and you can grab yourself a piece of pre-made 7/8 dowel. That'll work great here, and you can just do this method on both ends where you drill a hole and you put a piece of smaller dowel through it. But I happen to have some walnut stock. I thought that'd be a nice look for this vise to go with the ash jaw. Nice piece of wood for contrast there. So that's the route I took. But again, you can use whatever handle you like, and you'll have yourself a nice little vise to work with. So let's get that put in. Let's get our dowel glued in place, and we'll cut it off. So at this point, we actually have a functional vise. We just don't have a handle on it yet, but that's not going to stop us from turning that knob with our hands, and I can secure the handle in here. Just something to hold it for me while I slide the dowel through it and kind of eyeball it and struggle with it to get it lined up to where it needs to be. And then I'm going to use the pole saw just to make a little mark in it so I know where to cut it. So I'm just going to push forward on the pole saw here so it's not trying to bite. It just kind of starts a little bit of a groove. Then we'll pull our handle out, put our oak dowel in, watch it flop around in the breeze while we're trying to get the vise closed on it. And we'll give her a little cut. And this is completely optional, but I'm just going to use a little bit of sandpaper and clean up the edges on that dowel. And then we're going to take some natural Danish oil. Natural is the color. Allows it to not really add any color to the wood. So I'm just going to soak a little bit of a white rag here. And we're going to just kind of generously rub that all over the handle. It's hard to tell from this angle, but it actually ended up looking pretty nice after we got the Danish oil on there. Gives it a nice deep chocolate color for this Peruvian walnut. Very beautiful wood. Now, of course, be careful not to get the finish inside of that hole. Otherwise, our glue, when we try to glue the dowel in, isn't going to adhere very well. So I'm just going to take and put just a tiny little drop of glue in the center of the dowel. And I'm going to spread that around the center of the dowel, being careful not to put it toward the ends. So that way, only the center is getting glued and we don't have a lot of cleanup to do after we slide that in here. So just smooth it through. And then we're going to push it through the hole in our handle. Give it a little bit of a twist just to kind of spread that glue out inside the hole there. And voila. Just going to use the same rag that I used to put the Danish oil on the thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of going around the oak dowel there. And that's kind of doing two things. It's wiping off the tiny little bit of glue that came out. And it is applying finish to the dowel itself. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. And if you don't care, please hit that like button and subscribe. We got a lot of great projects coming up right around the corner. Thanks.